Trump and I had our first debate, and I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate.
If I could stand in front of Trump right now, I would just say, concentrate on your wins. Forget about everything that she's doing.
A short time ago, I accepted the resignation of the NYPD Commissioner, Edward Caban. He concluded that this is the best decision at this time.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. So Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump back on the campaign trail today. The first time since Tuesday night's debate in Philadelphia. Trump is now rallying supporters tonight in Tucson, Arizona. And as we just learned, a judge has now dismissed 2 criminal counts against Trump in the Georgia election interference case. Meanwhile, Trump has also ruled out today participating in another debate against the vice president. Harris made a stop this afternoon in the battleground state of North Carolina, where she is neck and neck in the race with Trump in the Tar Heel state. Harris is working there to build on the debate and what many of her allies perceive as a win. She'll be holding a rally in Charlotte this afternoon and in Greensboro, North Carolina this evening. But we start with some of that breaking news on former President Trump. Nicole Killian, our colleague, is on Capitol Hill. Nicole, what are you learning about the Georgia case and the criminal charges against Trump?
Well, what we have learned is that 2 of those charges, as you mentioned, have been dropped, and this comes just a couple of months after that same judge, Judge Scott McAfee, also dismissed 3 other counts against the former president. So rather than facing 13 counts in this 41-count indictment, that's now down to 8. Now, these counts are around the issue of filing false documents related to the so-called false elector scheme, a meeting of these alleged false electors in Georgia back in December of 2020. It's important to note that part of the reason why these charges were dropped was because some other defendants in the case who were also allegedly involved in this false elector scheme, John Eastman and Sean Steele, a state senator, that they are the ones who kind of requested that the judge take another look at these charges. So the charges against them also dropped as well. But this is significant in the sense that we did hear from the former president's attorney who said that he has prevailed again. That is Stephen Sadow, who represents the former president in this Georgia case. And, this comes at a time, though, where this case has essentially been frozen. It's been on ice because, as you know, earlier this year, there was a motion to potentially disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from this case. That process played out at the beginning of the year, that complaint coming from yet another defendant in this case. We know that same judge, Scott McAfee, allowed Fani Willis to stay on the case so long as Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade stepped down, which he did. But then that entire process and his decision was appealed. So we are now waiting for this appellate court hearing, which will now take place at the end of the year to again determine whether or not the district attorney should stay on this case. So consequently, in spite of these charges being dropped today, there is still really virtually no movement in this case, and there can't be until this issue of whether or not Fani Willis should stay on the case is decided, which, again, that hearing will take place at the end of this year. Fani Willis, for her part, and her office is declining comment, but they are reviewing this latest ruling from Judge McAfee, so we'll see if they take any action down the road.
Some movement down in Georgia. Nicole Killian, thank you.
You bet.
Now let's go to our colleague Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is in Arizona traveling with Trump, and Nancy Cordes, our chief White House correspondent in North Carolina with Vice President Kamala Harris. Great to see both of you. Thanks for joining us from the campaign trail. Nancy, we'll start with you. The Harris campaign looks at this debate as something that's really given them a bounce. So how are they now approaching this new state of the campaign, this next chapter?
Hey, Robert, good to be with you. Yeah, they're saying that they are embarking now on what they're calling an aggressive new phase. Aggressive in the sense that she is going to pick up the pace when it comes to her campaign events, pick up the pace when it comes to interviews with local reporters in battleground states, and release a slew of new ads with clips from that debate, which they viewed as a win. They are also announcing that since the debate took place on Tuesday night, they have raised another $47 million. And in the rally that she just held here in Charlotte, North Carolina, the first of two here in North Carolina today, Bob, she laid down the gauntlet and challenged Donald Trump to do yet another debate. Take a listen to that.
I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate. Because this election and what is at stake could not be more important.
Now, what she may or may not have known when she said that was just that a few minutes earlier, former President Trump had closed the door on the possibility of another debate, posting on Truth Social that he's not going to do it, that he thinks that he won the debate on Tuesday night and that he doesn't feel the need to engage in another one. So that's where things stand right now, Bob. But they could always change. Trump has gone back and forth a lot, as you know, on this topic of whether to do another debate.
And Nancy, just stick with us for a moment. I know you're busy on the trail. North Carolina, such a battleground. Is the Harris campaign optimistic?
They know that it's an uphill battle. It is the one battleground state that Joe Biden did not win in 2020, but they're feeling bullish. I mean, the state does have a Democratic governor, so a Democrat can win here statewide, and they feel that the Republican who is running for governor now is not that strong. So they feel that Democrats have an opening. Therefore, Kamala Harris has an opening. They're opening new campaign offices all the time, particularly in rural parts of the state where they feel that they can, you know, if not outright win, just boost their numbers a little bit in a way that might help them get over the top statewide. And then, you know, the part of the plan, as we have discussed, is just to keep coming back to this state and the other battleground states again and again and again. Just show her face, press the flesh, and hope that that's enough to get her over the top.
Caitlin, you're in Arizona covering former President Trump. That's the Sun Belt. Is there a focus on immigration there today, and why is he going back?
Yeah, Bob, good to see you. Well, remember, Arizona was decided by just under 11,000 votes. So this is a key battleground state that Trump lost by that slim margin last time around. And they're really hoping to shore it up this time around, given that the race has really tightened in some of these other key battlegrounds. He's been here about 4 times since this start of this election cycle. And he's been here twice in the past month. I was with him about a couple of weeks ago when he visited the southern border. Every time he comes to Arizona, immigration is top of mind for him, as it is for voters as well here. We are in Tucson, which is just about an hour from the southern border. And most voters that we talked to standing in line at the Trump rally earlier today said immigration is top of mind for them. Listen to what one voter told us just earlier.
I support legal immigration. I think like most of these people probably do, but seeing the illegal immigration problem to the numbers that it's reached, I think we're handcuffed with this administration. I don't think they allow them to do the jobs that they're supposed to do. And I mean, millions of immigrants have come through, and that's concerning.
And she had mentioned that she is a second-generation American, and so this issue is personal for her. But Bob, another item that Trump is going to focus on here in Arizona is the economy, but underneath that, the cost of housing. That is something that we hear a lot from voters on the trail, and it's something that actually has shown up in our polling as well. A poll that we had in Arizona, CBS News, a few months ago showed that a vast majority of voters here believe that it is more difficult for them to buy a house now than it was for their parents' generation. So I don't know if you can see on the signs behind me, that is an issue that they're going to talk about, as well as no tax on tips, another policy that the former president has been championing here. But as you mentioned, the debate about debates is also hovering over this, with some voters here acknowledging to us that, in their view, Trump didn't have the kind of debate they wanted him to have, his supporters did, but they also kind of echoed the rhetoric coming from the campaign, which was to blame the moderators and the media for that performance.
And a quick follow-up, Caitlin. The former president says he's now not doing a further debate, another debate with the vice president. What are you learning about that decision?
Well, Bob, as you mentioned, he is saying that on Truth Social. His team yesterday said that they had still wanted to do this September 25th debate that they had proposed. The Kamala Harris campaign had said they want to do another debate, and you heard Nancy talk about Harris continuing that message today. So whether this does change, whether he changes his mind, remains to be seen. That can always be an open question. But it is a acknowledgement that this was something kind of hovering over, and it does raise questions about, whether the, what the evaluation is of Trump's performance among his own supporters. You've had some critics within the Republican Party criticizing him for taking the bait that Kamala Harris laid out for him and not pressing the case against her that his advisors had wanted him to, instead of going off on tangents and other things that have now kind of come to the forefront. They were hoping that he would focus on the policy differences, and that's what we hear from voters on the ground here. They're very reluctant, those supporting him are very reluctant to issue any criticisms of him, but you can hear them kind of subtly that they want him to just stay on message, get through these next 7 weeks or so, and kind of close the deal, in the campaign's words.
Nancy Cordes and Caitlin Huey-Burns, appreciate your reporting. Good luck on the campaign trail.
They wanted to get it out of Congress and out of the federal government, and we did something that everybody said couldn't be done.
The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
From abortion to health care, this week's debate covered pivotal issues facing the American people. Coming up next, we'll speak with New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham about what's at stake in November. You're streaming America Decides.
Donald Trump and J.D. Vance want to dismantle our healthcare system, repeal the Affordable Care Act, and eliminate protections for pre-existing conditions. Either these guys don't get it, or they just don't care.
New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham made health care central to her address at the Democratic National Convention last month in Chicago. During Tuesday's debate, former President Donald Trump reopened that discussion about repealing the Affordable Care Act, saying he has, quote, concepts of a plan. And Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham joins us now. Governor, great to see you. Thank you for taking the time. What's your response to how former President Trump handled the health care question at the debate?
Well, Robert, first, thanks for having me on. He didn't answer it. I mean, concepts, he has none. If he had anything, he would have been well prepared to talk about it. I was in Congress for most of our votes every single day in a Republican majority had something to do with directly or indirectly repealing the Affordable Care Act. The reason his own party, including the late Senator McCain, said no to repealing the Affordable Care Act is understanding what it does to middle-class Americans, people with pre-existing conditions, particularly minority Americans who, at the first time, have expanded coverage under the Affordable Care Act. There isn't a plan. They don't believe that health care is a fundamental right in this country. And if you don't believe that, you are not leaning in to provide coverage. And he made that, I believe, incredibly clear once again.
Vice President Harris clashed with Trump on the debate stage on the issue of abortion rights. How is that issue playing out in your state on the ground in terms of voter conversations with you and with other Democrats? Is it really a top issue in terms of driving Democratic turnout and maybe winning over some other voters?
Absolutely, it is, and it has been. New Mexico has been a very forward-leaning state in terms of making sure that we are a place where women all across America can seek reproductive health care, abortion care, and aftercare. We've got a national hotline so that you can reach us. I just did a groundbreaking for a clinic. We're paying for the construction, the capital work, to make sure that, because it's a primary care issue. This This is how you do contraceptives, cancer screenings, other healthcare screenings. This is how you treat women of all ages and their families. And we're clear that in rural parts of the country, this is pivotal to overall women's health. It saves lives. So it is a very clear issue here. And I think most New Mexicans unequivocally take Trump at his word, or the lack of his ability in the debate. We believe that he will ban abortion in this country, that he's squarely on that side, that he has no understanding of the risk to women's health and their reproductive freedoms. And frankly, I said it in my address, I don't think ultimately they care about maternal well-being and health. They certainly don't care about our fundamental freedoms. It is a very critical issue in New Mexico.
Governor, do debates matter, especially the last debate between Harris and Trump? You have many Democrats feeling she had a commanding performance. Now the former president says he will not participate in another debate. It does seem sometimes, at least to me as a reporter, we're living in an episodic moment in American politics where the national memory, voter memory about some of these issues, whether it's President Biden's exit, the assassination attempt of Trump, seem to be fleeting in terms of conversations on the ground. What do you think the long-term impact of this debate is going to be, if any?
Very good question, Robert, and I'm not sure what the long-term impact is, except in this context. First, I agree with you. There's such an onslaught of information, some of it mis or disinformation, from the internet to media and radio. It's everywhere. And so it's, I think, overwhelming to most folks who may have 1 or 2 or 10 issues that they're following and to really feel like they have the facts that they need. 2, voters like being close and personal to the candidate that they are being asked to vote for, which is why you're seeing both of them. But certainly I'm seeing the vice president really do an amazing job at getting to the battleground states, getting to voters, and continuing to talk about the issues, her plans, the messages, lifting the middle class, moving forward, turning the page, the things that we want, right? Believing in the American dream starts with believing in America. And in the debate, the former president said that we were a failed nation. And I bristle when I have anyone say anything like that. I believe in this country. We are all patriotic. We love this country. And we know that you can create an agenda and better days, but you better have a plan and a vision for that. She does. However, her commanding performance, I think, created new opportunities for people to really want to know more about her vision for America. And I think it showed once again that Trump has no plan or vision and is an angry, shallow individual who's promoting and moving towards Project 2025, no matter how he tries to disavow it, because his actions are completely reverse of that. And that he wants this sort of revenge, and it's all personal. And she made the case that her job as vice president and her future job, if elected, is to care about the rest of us. And so in that regard, I think it's really created the kind of momentum and openness for voters who are undecided to really look carefully now at the vice president.
And quickly, just in the final seconds here, Governor, would you like to see Vice President Harris come to New Mexico and campaign, or do you have everything covered and you got the win coming for the Democrats on your own?
Well, I'm feeling really good, Robert. I do. And given her positions on so many issues, including reproductive freedoms, tax breaks for the middle class, investments in small businesses, affordable housing, these are key issues in New Mexico. So I think that that resonates. Of course, New Mexico would love to have the vice president here. And I think she'd have a very strong, warm reception. But if I were a campaign strategist, I would certainly want to debate, and they are, battleground states, winning this election, being very clear about where those margins are. And today, with recent polling, we're seeing New Mexico continue to move in that vice president blue column. So I feel good, but there isn't a voter anywhere who doesn't want to see the candidates in their home states and hometowns. And the vast majority, in my view, of New Mexicans would be very excited to see Vice President Harris and or Governor Walz right here in our fair, fine, beautiful state.
It is a fair, fine, and beautiful state. I do believe, though, Governor, your neighbor, Arizona, might get a little bit more attention this time around.
Well,
Governor,
I'm happy to travel over there and to make the case myself. And I love Arizona, not the same as New Mexico, but Governor Hobbs is a great leader, and there's a lot of incredible things going on in Arizona, and we could highlight those as well.
what a neighbor. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, thank you.
Thank you.
A new national poll shows who voters think came out on top at that debate. We'll dig into the latest numbers with our political panel. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Vice President Harris is focusing these days, at least today, on North Carolina, but tomorrow she'll turn her attention back to a key blue wall state. She'll have an event in Pennsylvania, where our polling at CBS News finds the candidates tied. Governor Tim Walz is barnstorming Michigan and Wisconsin tomorrow, where the race is also very tight. Molly Ball and Finn Gomez joined us now. Molly is a senior political correspondent at the Wall Street Journal. Finn is CBS News' political director. Let's begin by listening to Vice President Harris on the campaign trail today in North Carolina.
Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, right? He who has vowed that if reelected, he'll be a dictator on day one, that he will weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies, and has called for the, quote, termination of the Constitution of the United States of America.
We are hearing from former President Trump that he will not participate in a debate. What do you make of it?
Well, it's consistent with the spin that he unleashed when he first came out into the spin room immediately after the debate, claiming that it was because he won that she wants another chance at him. But I think there's a pretty resounding consensus at this point that he actually lost the debate. And his advisors would probably prefer that he not debate again and risk a repeat of that performance. So I think we're going to hear her continue to taunt him, continue to claim that he's afraid to face her. The question is, will that get to him, and is there any chance he changes his mind? I would love to see another debate.
Bob, he's done this before, though. It's kind of his MO, his pattern that we've seen, even before the ABC debate, where he basically said he sowed some doubt that he was even going to show up. So I mean, frankly, could the ABC and Philly debate be the last debate? It could be, but I do think that there's a potential that he does change his mind. We've seen it happen before.
What about Vice President Harris? She, as Nancy Cordes said earlier in the program, is trying to signal this is a new aggressive phase of the campaign. What does that mean?
It's a good question. It seems kind of the same to me. They do say that she's going to be doing more media interviews, engaging more with local media. So that would certainly be a bit of a change. She's done a little bit of that so far, but not a lot. But, you know, going to the swing states and giving speeches is basically what she's been doing all along. So it may be more of a branding exercise than anything. Obviously, with 8 weeks to go before the election, both of these candidates are going to be on the campaign trail every chance they get, out in those swing states every chance they get.
I asked the New Mexico governor about the impact of the debate. Inside the Trump campaign, what are your sources telling you, Finn, about how they're processing what happened and whether it will have an impact?
I think, what I've been hearing from my sources close to the campaign is that, the spin is that it won't have an impact. The debates don't matter. But clearly, we saw that the June 27th debate did have an impact, a very sizable impact. Look, I do think that, I think at this point, with just 54 days to go until Election Day, voters are starting to turn in and starting to make, if they haven't made their decision, they're getting close to their decision. I think every single factor matters. And I think a tentpole like a debate does matter. It does have an impact, especially one in Pennsylvania. You talked about the importance of these blue wall states. There is no greater state of importance than the battleground state, the Keystone State. So I think it does matter.
The vice presidential debate is going to be hosted by CBS News on October 1st. Sometimes these are very high stakes. You have Sarah Palin's showdown in 2008 with Joe Biden in the vice presidential debate, got a lot of eyeballs. What are you looking for with the upcoming vice presidential debate?
I think it's going to be fascinating to see these two candidates who are unknown quantities to most Americans and to see what approach they take. You know, we've seen both of them really embody that traditional running mate role of the attack dog. They've both been extremely aggressive out there in attacking the opposition, which is not to say that the nominees themselves haven't been pretty aggressive on the attack. But I think that means it's going to be a very feisty debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. And I think both of them have colored perceptions of the overall ticket to some extent. You know, we see Walz is the most popular member of either ticket. Vance is the least popular member of either ticket. And I think that they, you know, to the extent that they have a pretty well-established profile on the right, on the left, it has helped voters sort of understand where these nominees are coming from.
And when you're looking at the map, Finn, these days, as political director, what are you paying attention to?
I'm looking at North Carolina. I think North Carolina, there's been a lot of talk, and I just did so myself about Pennsylvania, but I think North Carolina has a big role as well. I mean, I think Trump needs that state to win. His path to 270 it hinges upon his success in North Carolina. From the get-go, even when Biden was at the top of the ticket, the Harris campaign have told us they have emphasized the significance of North Carolina as well. They feel that they can turn it blue. It would be the first time since Obama did in 2008. But there's been an influx of Northerners who have moved there since the pandemic. You know, it's changed. So I think it's critical to both campaigns and both of their paths to 270.
Molly, when you look at the final few weeks of this campaign and you're thinking through conceptually what you want to write about, what you want to cover, you write major profiles as well as daily journalism. What's on your mind now post-debate?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the map, about the Senate map as well. I have a story coming out on the Ohio Senate race, which is going to be pivotal for both parties, in which, although Ohio, sadly for me, because I love Ohio, is not a swing state anymore, it's a fascinating state.
Is Senator Sherrod Brown in trouble?
Absolutely, he's in trouble. I mean, this is a state that Trump won by 8 points twice, which means that and is expected to win it by about the same margin again. And so, and it's also just a fascinating couple of profiles of these two candidates. Sherrod Brown, a populist Democrat, Bernie Moreno, a sort of J.D. Vance-style populist, new-style Trump Republican. And so I think, and as you know, I also am a Westerner. I'm fascinated by those Sunbelt states. I'm fascinated by Arizona and Nevada and which way they're going to go, and also the Senate races in both of those states. So there's a lot of geography, a lot of good trips to take before this election is over.
You reported in Las Vegas, right?
That's right. I was a reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal.
And now at the Wall Street Journal. Finn Gomez, Molly Ball, we really appreciate you coming by. Thank you. From FBI raids on the homes of New York City Mayor Eric Adams and his inner circle to an alleged Chinese government agent in the office of Governor Kathy Hochul, the scandals are rocking the Empire State. We'll have more on what's happening there coming up on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. New York City and City Hall in turmoil these days due to federal investigations involving multiple members of Mayor Eric Adams, his inner circle. Police Commissioner Edward Cobbin resigned today, less than a week after U.S. attorneys seized cell phones from him and his twin brother. He previously said he would not step down. He was just one of several administration officials working with Mayor Adams to have their home searched by federal authorities in the last week. Senior New York editor at Politico, Sally Goldenberg, joins us now. Sally, thanks for being with us. So the feds have not charged anyone yet in these inquiries. What do we know, though, about why these searches were conducted?
So there's a number of different investigations going on. The federal agents last week raided the homes and seized phones of at least 5 people in Mayor Adams' inner circle. And it seems like they're looking into a combination of bribery scandals, kickbacks, and use of official office. In the case of the police commissioner, for instance, his twin brother, James, is being looked at for, he runs a nightclub security business, and there's allegations that he was doing some sort of a shakedown racket in exchange for kickbacks. So it's sort of a sprawling panoply of things.
Let's listen to what Mayor Adams had to say about the commissioner's resignation today.
I respect his decision, and I wish him well. Commissioner Caban dedicated his life to making our city safer, and we saw a drop in crime for 13 of the 14 months he served as commissioner.
What's your assessment of how the mayor handled that?
I think he had to push him out. I mean, he is saying that he didn't push him out, but we have sourcing that he did, or that he at least encouraged him to resign. And I think he had to do that. I think he has to show to federal agents and to voters that he's taking these investigations seriously. I suspect that the police commissioner won't be the last person who leaves. So I think, I think he handled it the right way, but, in the context of this is a pretty huge and growing problem for him, both legally and politically, even though he himself has not been implicated in anything.
So how tough of a moment is this for Mayor Adams, who, when he won in 2021, declared that he was, quote, the future of the Democratic Party? What now for him?
Yeah, I mean, he's up for re-election next year, and he's got the primary is in June in New York City. The primary is the race for the most part. So he's got, a few months to really turn this around. It's politically hugely problematic for him. I think he does have the ability to turn it around if he gets rid of some people who are seen as bad apples, if he continues to change the narrative, or not continues, starts to change the narrative, announce, things unrelated to this, just start, cracking down on other programs and other goals and policies that he's putting forth, then, I think he has a chance, but it's not good right now.
What about what's going on elsewhere in New York? You have up in Albany a former aide to Governor Kathy Hochul charged with being a Chinese agent and helping the Chinese government. Where does that go from here?
So that's pending, and I think it's, it sort of remains to be seen what happens with that. It was a long time that aide, Linda Sun, was in state government in various positions, and nobody really knew anything about her and her alleged ties to the Chinese government. So sort of a wait and see at this point.
And has the governor responded to what's happening in her administration? Has she assured voters that this is isolated, or is there concern this could be more widespread?
Yeah, no, she has, and she's definitely, she's kind of pled ignorance on the whole thing. She inherited the stigma from her predecessor.
Sally Goldenberg, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.
So Taylor Swift, a global superstar, how her endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris is influencing the 2024 race. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. So Taylor Swift has endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris in her campaign. She's also encouraged people to click on a voter registration link online. That's had a lot of attention in recent days. The question is, what kind of impact will it really have on the presidential race? Tom Bonnier joins us now. He is a senior advisor at TargetSmart, which analyzes voter registration data. Tom, thanks for being here. What are you seeing from Taylor Swift in her endorsement, especially in terms of driving civic participation?
Yeah, so I think this is a question a lot of us had after we saw the endorsement. I think a lot of people expected it was coming, but the question of how much of an impact will she have beyond just the excitement, the likes on Instagram, will it translate into voter registration? So we can see some of the back end data in terms of the data that is coming and hitting off the voter file that we build. And what we saw was this really massive increase. We're calling it the Swift effect now because it's really unlike anything I've seen. We're seeing a 400 or 500% increase in people coming and trying to register to vote immediately following the debate and in that period after Taylor Swift posted on Instagram. And what's really remarkable about that is usually you'll see these increases and they kind of fade away. In this case, we've seen it continue through the last 2 days into today.
How so?
Well, I'm told, I have two teenage daughters, that she was on the Video Music Awards on MTV last night. Apparently, she put out another pitch for people to register to vote. And so we're seeing this continued spike of 4 or 5 times what you would regularly see. So we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood 9,000 to 10,000 people per hour just hitting our system. That's not indicative of everything, but it's a lot of it.
And what does this mean for the election?
Well, a big part of this, the big question I think a lot of people ask is when you see new registrants, sure, they're registering to vote, will they vote? Well, we actually have statistics going back to 2020. We can see people who registered to vote this close to the election. over 80% of those new registrants actually turned out in the election. So it's safe to say that not only are these voters who are registering are a big deal, but it's likely that they're going to come out on Election Day or before Election Day in the early voting.
What are you seeing in Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania is a fascinating one. Now, we know that Pennsylvania is one of the blue wall states. It's likely to be decisive. And so when we look at the registration trends there, we've seen big increases, especially from younger voters, women voters, and voters of color. When you look at younger women of color, that sort of overlap of all three groups, you're seeing numbers that are almost unbelievable. In some cases, almost tripling the registration rate that we saw from those voters 4 years earlier in the 2020 cycle.
When you look at the data following Taylor Swift's endorsement of Harris and the push of that link to register to vote, do we have a profile of the kind of voter who's emerging from this Taylor Swift constituency?
It'll take a little while before we have the hard data on exactly who these people are, exactly where they are. But the data that we have been seeing so far in terms of the data hitting our system and the earlier voter registration data counts we have, again, it's overwhelmingly younger voters. It's more women than men. It's more voters of color. These are voters that overwhelmingly tend to lean Democratic. So it seems to be at this point very good news for the Harris campaign. But again, in the coming weeks, we'll be able to look at it with more granular detail.
Have you seen any Republican endorsement have any kind of effect on voter registration?
I haven't. Part of that might just be the lack of high-profile celebrity endorsements. And frankly, there's no one out there that I can imagine who comes close to Taylor Swift, just in terms of that following and her ability to motivate people and mobilize people. But in terms of the data, we have not seen a precedent that matches up to what we're seeing in the data now.
Is there any state out there where you're seeing an unusual spike? Forget Taylor Swift's specific endorsement, just in terms of voter participation and registration?
Yeah, this is the remarkable thing. And this sort of goes back to 2 years ago in the Dobbs decision, where after that decision, getting rid of Roe v. Wade effectively, we saw big increases, but it wasn't really around the country. It was in some states, but not in others. What's remarkable about what we've been seeing since Vice President Harris became the nominee is that you're seeing big increases, not just in these so-called purple states, the swing states and battlegrounds that will decide this presidential election, but you're seeing it in red states and blue states. In fact, one of the biggest increases we've seen so far in registration among these younger voters and voters of color is in Louisiana, a state that is incredibly unlikely to be competitive in the presidential election.
Tom Bonnier, thank you for coming by America Decides. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, who has better odds on winning the election? Well, Vice President Harris and supporters of former President Trump could decide on that in terms of placing a bet in the coming days. A federal judge has now cleared the way for betting on election results in the U.S. for the first time since over a century ago. In November, recently, a New York company sued to overturn that ban and won. And today, a Washington, D.C. judge ruled against the federal government's request to delay the ruling, meaning betting on presidential politics is now legal.
The public servants of the Department of Justice do not bend to politics, and that they will not break under pressure.
Attorney General Merrick Garland condemns what he says is a, quote, escalation of attacks against Justice Department employees. More on what he had to say coming up on America Decides. The Justice Department has come under fire in recent years from some Republicans for its handling of various investigations, including both former President Trump and President Biden. Some Democrats have been critical as well. Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland condemned threats against the DOJ, saying that officials there will not be intimidated.
These attacks have come in the form of conspiracy theories, dangerous falsehoods, efforts to bully and intimidate career public servants by repeatedly and publicly singling them out, and threats of actual violence.
Joining us now is Scott McFarland, who covers justice issues in Capitol Hill. Scott, great to be with you. Walk us through what we've learned today from the Attorney General about the threats and how he wants to move ahead.
Bob, just him giving those remarks in a public setting was telling in itself. This was a set of remarks to an internal group of Department of Justice officials and employees. He could have done that in a windowless conference room upstairs, but he did it in a big auditorium with a camera and an open microphone for the world to see. He's trying to make a broader statement and put out a broader message, not just that we are in this pernicious, volatile, and destabilized environment in which members of the Department of Justice are getting threats and menaced and harassed for doing their jobs, for prosecuting cases in this politically toxic moment, but that it really does impact families, too. It's kids and wives and husbands at home who feel this stress and, to a degree, some of this trauma due to the threatening environment. Let's hear more of what Merrick Garland had to say in this unique speech to an internal and external audience.
Our norms are a promise that we will not allow this department to be used as a political weapon. And our norms are a promise that we will not allow this nation to become a country where law enforcement is treated as an apparatus of politics.
And Bob, Merrick Garland did not mention any candidates by name, didn't mention any parties to keep this apolitical, but you can hear the echoes there when he says we won't let our agency be used for political purposes, happening just days after Donald Trump posted on social media that it's time to prosecute the donors, the lawyers, those who are somehow involved in politics he doesn't like.
Scott, what are we learning at CBS News about the Justice Department and how it's assessing the threats across the country as we head toward the election?
And it's not just the Department of Justice doing this. It's state-level officials raising red flags for anybody to see, Justice Department officials and otherwise. They were here yesterday, a number of state secretaries of state, both parties, saying you got to be aware, we are getting volatile threats at the state level. County officials, county clerks, local election officials, too. And we have to be mindful of this. We have to have proper law enforcement protection. The Department of Justice will certainly be asked to prosecute those who interstate threat, those who issue threats across state lines. But this is also a chilling dynamic that could be a disincentive, Bob, for people to want to pick up and help work an election, work a poll, be a county clerk. All of this is troubling this close to an election. And so far after the 2020 election, where people thought the fever might have been broken, it has certainly not been.
Scott, turning toward Capitol Hill, you have new reporting on a contentious hearing in Congress about alleged voter fraud. What's going on that front?
Now, this is also destabilizing, not to be Debbie Downer here, Bob, but there was a group of secretaries of state, Republican and Democrats, in front of a panel, which of course has both parties too, arguing with each other over whether states are vulnerable to widespread fraud or widespread voting by undocumented immigrants. And it's a Mars and Venus thing going on here. You're speaking a different language and you're arguing at each other about something and you can't agree this close to the election. What's been defining this week on Capitol Hill, Bob, is a U.S. House Republican plan to fund the government, prevent a shutdown September 30th, but to include something called the SAVE Act, a bill that would prohibit undocumented migrants from voting in federal elections. Democrats have been unequivocal and consistent in their response, saying it's already illegal for undocumented migrants to vote in federal elections. It does not happen. And to have this debate fuels conspiracy theories, and one Michigan Democrat told me could be a disincentive for some legal, documented immigrants to go to the polls and vote themselves. And that's troubling. That complicates, to put it mildly, Bob, chances of getting this thing hashed out well before September 30th.
Scott McFarland, thank you. Meanwhile, the National Security Agency is launching a new podcast, pulling back the curtain a bit on one of our nation's most secretive intelligence agencies. It's titled No Such Podcast, a play on its initials, when the NSA used to be referred to as No Such Agency. The first episode details their involvement in the capture of Osama bin Laden. You can catch new episodes of that on Thursday through mid-October. Interesting development from a government agency. That does it for us today at America Decides. We'll be back with another edition Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.